What's happening, y'all? Welcome inside the Fantasy Stock Exchange. Danny and Bush coming at you with our top late round dynasty values. We're talking about guys outside the top 150 picks or so about the 12th, 13th round range and beyond in your dynasty startup drafts that you can expect to find very good value on. We are not actually talking about any rookies today. We're going to leave the rookies out just because the last two videos on our channel, you guys can go check those two out. Deep sleepers and regular sleepers are all rookie related. So if you want some late round rookies that you can target, you can go check out those videos. But today we're just going to be focused on the veterans. I know a lot of you guys are probably at this point in dynasty startup season, you're probably at the point in the draft where you're just taking dart throws on players in the 20 something round or whatever. So we're going to help you kind of parse through who is a decent shot to take on somebody.
Yeah, no, definitely. Again, as Corey mentioned, we talked about all the rookies. Let's get into some veterans. Let's get into guys that are going to give you incredible value given their current ADP. Because quite frankly, some of the guys we're about to list have legitimate wide receiver 3, RB3 type upside in the upcoming season. And the fact that they're going outside of the top 150 picks just speaks volume to how you can get early returns at this current point in dynasty startup season. So pumped to go through it.
Right. All right. So we're going to hit the intro and then we're going to get into the first guy. Okay, so as Danny mentioned, he said wide receiver 3 and running back 3. So we're not talking about guys that have top 5 upside at the position. No. And anybody probably who tells you that there's someone at this point in the draft that has top 5 upside is probably lying. So the guys that we're talking about are more so depth pieces for your dynasty roster. Maybe they work their way into your wide receiver 3 slot, your running back 3 slot, and they work their way into depth roles for your team and flex positions or something like that. So the first guy we're going to be talking about is Nelson Agholor, wide receiver formerly of the Las Vegas Raiders, now of the New England Patriots. A lot of people don't probably know this, but Nelson Agholor finished as a top 30 wide receiver in PPR last year and a top 24 wide receiver. I believe he was wide receiver 21 in standard. So this is a guy that kind of broke out low-key. That prompted the New England Patriots to give him a 2-year, $22 million contract, $16 million guaranteed. Last year, he was number 2 in yards per reception among all wide receivers, number 7 in yards per target, number 10 in fantasy points per target, and number 19 in QBR when targeted. So this is a guy that, despite being, a bust or a guy that a lot of Eagles fans probably don't have a lot of kind words to say about, Nelson Agholor actually performed quite well last season. And with the Eagles, I think the big difference between his time with the Raiders last year and his time with the Eagles before is that with the Eagles, he was used most of the time as a slot receiver, 54+% of the time. Every season since 2017, he's been in the slot, running routes from the slot. And his average depth of target over the past couple seasons has been 11.02 in his time in Philadelphia and 11.04 yards per reception. Whereas last year, he was up at 15.7 average depth of target and 18.7 yards per reception. So this is a guy that was basically used as a deep threat last year. He was not used in the slot role that the Eagles tried to fit him into. And I think when you look at his fit with the Patriots, because that's obviously his new team that he's with, they haven't really been a great offense since 2017, or at least a great passing offense when they last had a deep threat in their offense, which was Brandon Cooks. And all of the weapons that the Patriots brought in this offseason are more so short to intermediate targets between Jonnu Smith and Hunter Henry, being that they're both tight ends, and Kendrick Bourne, who's more of a slot receiver. Nelson Agholor has a real chance to kind of dominate the second and third levels of that offense. And Agholor had over a 19 yards per route run on plays of 20 plus yards last season, and over a 6 yards per route run on plays of 10 to 19 yards. So like I said, the second and third levels of the field, Nelson Agholor, they didn't add anybody. They didn't draft Rashad Bateman. They didn't draft Seth Williams like we predicted them to in our Matchmaker series. They didn't draft anybody in this draft that would indicate any kind of target competition for Nelson Agholor. So I don't really care who the quarterback is right now. If it's Cam Newton for a couple games, if it's Mac Jones for the rest of the season, I don't really know right now. It doesn't really matter to me. But if he has that much of a monopoly on those areas of the field, he's going to be a flex type of play at minimum for your dynasty roster. And like I said, if Mac Jones is like the next Tom Brady or the next Matt Ryan or something like that, then this could be his number one deep threat. And we could be looking at a 900 to 1,000 yard receiver with like 5 to 8 touchdown upside like we saw last year.
Yeah, no, definitely. And I don't want to make the comparison because it's really lazy to say, but we even saw a receiver that's able to hit that deep third of the field. Mac Jones was more than adept and capable of getting him the ball. We saw it with Devonta Smith this year. We saw it with Jalen Waddle this year. Mac Jones is fine delivering it at those parts of the field. When you're talking about Nelson Agholor as a whole, the fact that he's going outside the top 150 picks, despite being paid as the 4th highest wide receiver contract in free agency this year. Yes, you heard that correctly. That was ahead of Will Fuller, Juju Smith-Schuster, Marvin Jones, all these guys. No, it was Nelson Agholor who actually got paid the most out amongst them. So he's at pick 154, and I think his floor is going to be a wide receiver 4, wide receiver 5 for you. And the fact that you're able to get him this late, with that being his floor, is just insanity. So I fully agree here. I was going to take Agholor if you didn't take him. So glad to see he's well represented on this list. With that being said, I can kind of move off and go to Gerald Everett, tight end newly of the Seattle Seahawks, who's actually going around pick 187 right now. And every year we look at who's going to be the next breakout tight end, who has an opportunity, talent to be able to really strive in a new role. And I think Gerald Everett could very well be that guy this year, because when you're actually looking at both the financials and the opportunity ahead of him. So he's on a 1-year, $6 million deal with the Seattle Seahawks, moving away from the Los Angeles Rams this year. If you're looking at his 2020 campaign, he was tight end 24, despite only scoring 1 touchdown and splitting time with Tyler Higbee, which is just incredible to think about. He had over 400 yards, 41 receptions. He was involved, but at the end of the day here, his opportunity was always going to be capped in that offense because of the weapons around him. Guess what? He lands with Seattle in 2019. Jacob Hollister and Will Disley combined for 86 targets and a 17% target share on the Seahawks offense. And in 2020, Jacob Hollister, Will Disley, and Greg Olsen, the corpse of Greg Olsen, combined for 106 targets and a 19% target share on the Seahawks offense. So if you're actually looking at the situation, both Everett is proven over his years that he's a much more efficient option than any of these guys I listed. If you're talking about his efficiency in LA this year, he was 15th in yards after catch, 16th in yards per route run, 6th in target separation, and 5th in true catch rate. He steps into a role now with Jacob Hollister, who departed in free agency, Greg Olsen, who retired this summer, and his only real competition is going to be Will Disley, who's even proven anything in the NFL. So I think Gerald Everett could be that sneaky top 12 tight end that we talk about every year, and nobody's even mentioning his name whatsoever. The fact that he's going at pick 187 for the immense potential, immense upside he has in the Seahawks offense, who, when on their game, is a top 5 to 10 unit in the league. I'm all in on Gerald Everett, and if I can get him at this ADP, I'm literally going to walk out of every draft with him from here on.
Right. And I walked out of our listener league draft with him because I think he's like my tight end 3 or 4 on my roster. Like, and at that point in your draft, like, who are we really saying has top 12 type of upside at your tight end 3 or 4 in a dynasty startup? Like, not a lot of people have that type of upside. And the weird thing to me is that the Rams tight ends had more hype last year when they were on the same team than they do now that both of them are separated from each other and they're both the starting tight end, like, convincingly, of each of their offenses. So I found that a little weird. Gerald Everett's definitely a guy that I'm willing to take a shot on, though, because I do think as your tight end 3, tight end 4 on your dynasty roster, he's still a guy that's 26 years old or something like that. He had a great profile coming out of school. He went to a smaller school, so it's maybe taking him a little bit more time to develop, but that's fine. He's a tight end. That's usually how the position works anyway. So there's a good chance that now playing with a quarterback upgrade in Russell Wilson, that he can continue to be that efficient option that he's always been. So to the next guy that we're going to get to, and you're going to see a theme with a lot of these guys, is that football, like, this is football, man. People get injured. People don't perform up to their full potential. And you need to be aware of the guys that are behind them in depth charts and, competing for starting jobs with other players, because that's basically how fantasy works. A lot of the time we think that certain players have upside because they could be competing for a starting job, but we fail to recognize that sometimes people don't reach their full potential or they just get hurt, and you need depth regardless. So a guy that does screen very good depth to me, especially at this point in the draft, he is, I believe, the lowest ADP of anybody on this list. And that's Wayne Gallman, currently going at pick 232. So we're talking about like a 20th round pick or like a mid 19th round pick. Currently, he's in a very crowded situation in the 49ers, right? We have Wayne Gallman, who signed a vet minimum 1-year contract with the 49ers shortly before the NFL draft. To me, he's a very deep stash, right? But the reason I like Wayne Gallman in this spot is not because of his prospects with the 49ers. The reason I like him is because I think he's going to get cut from the 49ers. And right now, they currently have Raheem Mostert and Jeff Wilson, who they've proven that they like, Kyle Shanahan likes, and they also have JaMychal Hasty, who's an undrafted free agent last year, who got some run. And then on top of that, they drafted 2 running backs in Trey Sermon and Elijah Mitchell. So my guess is that Wayne Gallman is actually a post, training camp cut candidate, maybe even gets cut before that, because this is a guy they signed before they drafted those 2 guys. And the fact that they did draft 2 running backs is probably now makes Wayne Gallman expendable. And teams like Atlanta, teams like Arizona, all these teams make a lot of sense that as teams that might add a veteran back after cuts, because you got Mike Davis, who's the starter in Atlanta right now, but behind him, you got Javian Hawkins, a UDFA. You don't really have anybody else there with Mike Davis. And ironically, Wayne Gallman and Mike Davis both served to be pretty valuable handcuffs last year. And it'd be ironic if they were both on the same team next year, which would be pretty funny. But Chase Edmonds and James Conner, too, there's not a lot of stability there. None of those guys seem to be guys that could stay healthy in a workhorse type role. And I'm not saying Gallman would be a workhorse if he went there, but he'd be a valuable and interesting piece of that backfield. And I think we could all agree if Gallman went to either of those backfields, it really kills the value of the current guys there.
Yeah, no, definitely. And when you're looking at Gallman, you mentioned he's shown multiple times throughout his career that when he's thrust into a situation where he does get volume, he's able to produce from a fantasy football standpoint. What people don't understand is just because we don't like these guys who don't have the sexy names or aren't going to be Jonathan Taylor or Saquon Barkley for your fantasy team, doesn't mean they can't produce when given the opportunity. I fully think that Wayne Gallman is a capable NFL running back. And you mentioned it. It's almost a certainty at this point that he's probably going to be cut from the San Francisco 49ers. If he lands in any type of situation where he could be depended upon as a veteran number 2, number 3 type in a committee, I definitely feel like that you mentioned 19th, 20th round ADP is absolutely fitting for what he could do for you. So I fully agree. I really like that pick. And I can segue into another running back, and that's going to be J.D. McKissic, whose current ADP is actually at 159. And this one's simple as day to me. Okay. You're not going to hear many more advocates for Antonio Gibson than myself and Corey. But let's not take away the fact that J.D. McKissic saw 195 total opportunities, including 110 targets in the 16 games he played last year, which was good enough to finish as RB24 in half PPR formats and RB17 in full PPR formats. So if you actually take away the snap counts of the situation and you're wondering, well, was that only because Alex Smith was throwing to him? What was the issue here? Why isn't Antonio Gibson just going to take over? Well, if you actually look at how they were both used in weeks 1 to 10 last year, Gibson had 1 total snap on third down and did not run a single route on third down in the whole season. And he had 8 total touches on third down. J.D. McKissic was their whole third down identity this year. And while we do anticipate a slight roll bump for Antonio Gibson, I don't think he's just going to be completely blanked off the sheet on third down this year. I feel like both will be extremely high in general in terms of usage for this team. And JD is a serious complement in the backfield to what Gibson does regardless. Gibson is a great runner of the football who can contribute in all facets of the game. J.D. McKissic has shown to be one of the better receiving backs in the entire league. You're talking about a guy who, in terms of pure receiving ability, is probably in that top 5 to 7 type range in the entire league. So just because we want to hype up Gibson, just because we want to give him all the volume necessary, does not mean we should do that at the expense of J.D. McKissic. And when you're talking about J.D. McKissic, at his current 15th round startup pick, if he continues being the PPR machine that he is, top 30 type back, and is capable for Washington, he is the perfect RB4/5 for your dynasty roster, particularly if you're competing and you're in a win now type state. Because J.D. McKissic is going to go under the radar. He's the type of guy you plug into your flex, expect 12 to 15 points given his PPR upside, and you don't have to think twice about putting him in.
I literally won a fantasy league. Our listener league last year, our redraft league, I won that league because I had J.D. McKissic. And the craziest thing about that was my team was Devontae Adams, Stephon Diggs, Darren Waller, Justin Herbert. My other positions were carrying my team, but I drafted Jonathan Taylor, Mark Ingram, and Austin Eckler as my first 3 running backs. And JT was terrible for the longest time. Austin Eckler got hurt, and Mark Ingram was terrible. So I was starting J.D. McKissic as my RB1 most of the season. And I was able to, because of the strengths of the rest of my roster, still win the championship. And Eckler came back, obviously. And then JT got better, but I was still starting JD McKissic late into the season with those guys healthy. So yeah, he's a guy that a lot of people are going to underestimate. They're going to just, pass over him. They're going to take an upside swing at freaking Chris Evans, who we like, is a guy that we like. But when you think about the output that you're hoping from Chris Evans, you're hoping that he turns into JD McKissic. So, I mean, I think when it comes to that perspective, this is a guy that is absolutely great for your dynasty roster, especially, like you said, if you're on a win now team, if you have a lot of flex positions, if you take some riskier running backs early on that could bust or could get injured or something like that. He's definitely a guy that can fill out your depth of your dynasty roster. So the next guy that we're going to get into, we're going to swing at the tight end position again. And this is a guy, unlike some of the guys on this list that you might consider low upside, this is a guy that does have upside because we know we've been here before by this guy and he's burned us in the past. But OJ Howard is going too low, man. OJ Howard is currently going at pick 225, which is like an 18th round pick. And he's interesting for a couple reasons, right? First, we have his usage within his own team, right? I'm a Bucs fan. I watch this guy really closely. Howard in his limited usage last year, I think he went down in week 3 or something like that. It looked like him and Brady had quite the connection, to be honest. And it's a very small sample size, obviously, but he ran about 20 routes per game, which is similar to someone like Mike Gesicki or Hunter Henry or even Jonnu. That's actually more than Jonnu Smith ran last year. So despite being the tight end 2 on that team and the fact that they ran enough 12 personnel, they were able to support 2 viable tight ends in terms of routes run and things of that nature. And we know Brady will just throw it to the open person. He doesn't have any favorite targets or anything. So that's the first point. Second, Gronk is a very injury-prone player. Let's not forget this. He managed to play 16 games last year, but that's the first time since 2011 that that's happened. And there's always a chance that Howard could just be thrust into the starting role for Tom Brady, which is what we all wanted back when Tom Brady was in New England. We all wanted OJ Howard to be the tight end of the Patriots. If Gronk goes down for any significant period of time, don't forget that OJ Howard's going to be one of the biggest waiver wire ads at that point in the season, if that were to happen. And you could even just flip him at that point if you wanted to. And third, Howard is a free agent after this year. He's currently playing on his 5th-year option going into this season. And I highly doubt that the Bucs re-sign him after this year. They might even trade him at the deadline if they wanted to. So he's a former first-round pick. He's an absolutely elite athletic specimen. And as a Bucs fan, the mental side has always been what's holding him back, right? Everyone thinks it's Bruce Arians and he hates tight ends. No, the reason that Bruce Arians didn't allow OJ Howard to break out that year is because OJ Howard could not grasp the offense enough. He wasn't, from the mental aspect of the game, he wasn't there quite yet. And Bruce Arians isn't just going to be like, oh yeah, I'm going to throw this guy on the field, even though he has no idea what he's doing in my offense. So that's why his playing time kind of suffered that year. And I think maybe it'll click for him this year. He has a breakout year and a contract year, goes out and gets a big contract in free agency. You could either flip him then or hold on to him, whatever the case is. This is a guy that you're getting borderline in the 20th round that could turn into, at bare minimum, a tight end 2 this time next year.
Yeah, I know. I definitely agree. And just off his talent alone, he's worth that pick. And then you mentioned the opportunity with Brady this year. And then you mentioned the impending free agency. And then all these things combined just show how much of a value a guy in OJ Howard, who was at this point 2 years ago a 4th-round startup pick, it just goes to show you how ridiculously things can change after 2 years and the public narrative just getting on guys. Because let's be honest here, what did OJ Howard really do to deserve a 14-round drop? Got injured 1 year, had 1 off year as well. Like, he's still that guy. He's still that talented guy who had that top 5 upside we saw in his rookie season. So let's not just forget it. Like, again, you mentioned going into free agency this year, take the chance on him. 18th round, that's basically nothing. That's basically a rookie 3rd type worth in terms of startup value. So take that value anytime you can get it. So with that being said, you mentioned Brady. Let's get to his former old reliable back when he played with the Patriots. And I'm going to be mentioning, you guessed it, Mr. All Reliable James White, similar to what I said with JD McKissic, but let's just apply it into Bill Belichickian type terms, okay? He had a down year in 2020 by his standards. I fully understand that, but his downtick was mostly attributed to the number of targets he saw. He saw 62 in comparison to the 123 and 95 he saw in the 2 years prior. But with the addition of Mac Jones now in the fray, I expect that number to increase pretty significantly. Just from a schematic standpoint, Cam Newton's rushing ability and the sheer ineptitude of the overall weapons around that offense resulted in the offense just becoming so easily predictable, so redundant, so stale that in reality here, nobody was relevant on that entire offense. But with the additions of Jonnu, Hunter Henry, and Nelson Agholor, as you mentioned him earlier, the idea is that this offense will at least be somewhat capable of sustaining some type of success. And the automatic response from the fantasy community is going to be, well, if they're adding more weapons, like how is this good for James White? This is a good thing in my opinion, because quite frankly, this makes the offense more potent, more around the end zone for scoring opportunities. And quite frankly, 2 tight ends and a receiver is not going to affect James White's role as being that outlet out of the backfield that he's always been, because they're going to chip into each other. Let's not make it any mistake that they're going to chip into James White, because what James White does is a completely different role in the offense comparatively to Henry, Jonnu, and Nelson Agholor. So with that being said, at a 204 ADP, which is basically a 17th round ADP, you can get a guy who's shown multiple times throughout his career to be a top 20 PPR back. While I don't have that type of expectation, he could be a top 30, 35 PPR back as soon as this year. And if he does that and you're getting him in the 17th round, you just made extreme capital. This is a guy, as I mentioned with JD McKissic, you get him as your RB5, RB6. He could be a steady, reliable source in your flex spot. And you just made bank. You just made profit. You're a contending team. You got a free flex spot for 17th round pick. Take that anytime you can get it. I absolutely love James White's current value.
Yeah, like I said, I'll repeat it again. This is football. Injuries happen. If you have Jonathan Taylor and Dalvin Cook as your RB1 and 2, if they go down, who are you starting? Are you starting the flyer that you took on Zach Moss? Or whoever else that you don't feel comfortable starting? Are you comfortable starting Ramondre Stevenson in his own backfield? Probably not, right? You'd be more comfortable starting a guy like James White in that situation, which is why it's nice to have guys like James White on your roster, because you can, in bye weeks or with injuries or whatever, you can just throw them into your lineup when you need a fill-in. So I totally agree. And one thing that you didn't mention is that Rex Burkhead's gone now too from that backfield, who was the only other back in that backfield that really got any share of the receiving work. He vacates 33 targets, 100 opportunities overall. So maybe Damian Harris sees a little bit of an uptick in that area, but I do think James White should be back to his normal kind of target share. The question is how much starting opportunity does Mac Jones get? Because I think we can both agree that Mac Jones is better for his receiving volume than Cam Newton is. That's really the question, right? And James White, from a dynasty perspective, should be more valuable going forward than he is now, even though he is an older running back. He could go to the Buccaneers in a year from now, right? And that would really skyrocket his value. So he only signed a 1-year deal with the Patriots. He definitely could be, on the up and up after this season. So another guy that's a little bit more mundane than some people might be looking for in the late rounds of their draft, but Josh Reynolds, man. Josh Reynolds is in a prime situation to be a big time value in startup drafts. Corey Davis, Adam Humphries, and Khalif Raymond, the starting second, third, and fourth receiver for the Tennessee Titans, are now gone. They vacate 1,500 yards of receiving production and 155 targets of receiving production. A.J. Brown can't do everything himself. He probably could if they asked him to, but he's probably not going to be asked to. So, and that's just amongst receivers. I didn't even mention the fact that Jonnu Smith also vacates 500 yards, 8 touchdowns, and probably 50 targets as well. So when you look at the receiving numbers from the Tennessee Titans core last year, after A.J. Brown, Anthony Firkser and Derrick Henry are the top 2 remaining targets on that team. Derrick Henry is the third leading receiver from last year that's currently still on the team, and he had 100 receiving yards.
I was about to say, what do you have, 15 total targets?
Yeah, he had 113 yards, and he's the third leading receiver from last year. Titans added Dez Fitzpatrick, who you guys heard in my sleepers video in the 4th round of the draft. But if he struggles, Josh Reynolds could carve out a solid Jamison Crowder-like role in the offense as a depth flex option. And even if they do add Julio Jones or something like that, like another veteran receiver later on, I would put my money on Josh Reynolds being the third receiver in the offense behind A.J. Brown and whoever they add in the offseason, and keeping Dez Fitzpatrick on the bench at least for this year. So I think Josh Reynolds is a guy that's totally going to go under the radar. This is wide receiver 7-8 territory that you could get a guy that could legitimately plug into your flex spot week in and week out, not even just on bye weeks.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree. Again, Josh Reynolds was a guy I've had my eye on for quite a while, and he was underratedly productive last year. If I were to go through his stats right now, let me just check real quick.
Honestly, throughout his entire Rams career, he's been underratedly productive.
Yeah. No, literally though. And it just goes to show that the fact is he had 750 yards last year and nobody even talks about it. I believe he was a top 45 receiver in PPR formats, despite playing behind Robert Woods, Cooper Kupp, those two tight ends we talked about earlier. Josh Reynolds is going to have a role, and I expect him to be that wide receiver 2 in the offense. As much love as Des Fitzpatrick should get, I think Josh Reynolds, based off his resume alone, deserves that spot, at least initially, as the wide receiver 2. And if you're getting that at, what's his ADP right now? Would you say 100 and 180?
It's currently at 199, which is like a ridiculous 17th round pick.
Yeah, ridiculous value. So I fully agree there. I absolutely love that pick. That being said, let's go on to another reliable wide receiver 2 slot type. And that's going to be Cole Beasley. Like, rinse and fucking repeat on this guy every fucking year because you know what you're getting from him. He is the clear role as the wide receiver 2 and slot receiver for Josh Allen, and is coming off back-to-back 100-plus target and top 35 finishes at the wide receiver position. Yet he can't find his way into the top 150 players drafted in Dynasty ADP. Like, really? You can get him on your team as a wide receiver 6 or 7 at his current ADP, which is the 14th round, and it's just straight money for a contending roster. I fully expect him to continue his stay as a consistent threat and continually be criminally underrated, because let's be honest, people are going to look at him and be like, oh, would I rather the 5'8", 170-pound slot option, or rather this, I don't know, upside 6'4" fast guy in the freaking 14th round? Like, if I were to pull up the 14th round right now, somebody's going to make a decision and say, would I rather freaking...
I'll tell you who's going directly after him right now.
Bryan Edwards, right?
Khalil Herbert, Kylan Hill, LaMichael Pirine, Jamal Williams, Quintez Cephas, Sony Michel. Like, this is what we're talking about, right? Like, these guys that I just mentioned, while Cole Beasley's not sexy, right? Like, he's not a guy that you want on your fantasy team if you're in a redraft league and you're in like the 7th round. Like, he's not like a very exciting pick, but when you're getting him this late as your wide receiver 6, 7, 8 on your roster, this is a guy that you can legitimately plug in as your wide receiver 3 or your flex position that can give you pretty solid production. For crying out loud, this guy had more all-pro votes than Mike Evans last year.
That's insanity. But the fact that, Mike Evans is still a top 50 pick and Cole Beasley is a top 170. No, I'm kidding. Yeah. Don't ever compare Beasley to Evans, but regardless.
But it's true, man. Like, he was a productive player last year.
Yeah. Yeah, no, definitely. And the fact that he's going at 171 for the production that he gives you, you're getting a guy
and John Brown's gone too. Vacates some production.
If you can tell me Cole Beasley plays 16 games next year and finishes with under 850 receiving yards, I'll call you a liar. Because quite frankly, that's just simply not going to happen given the potency of the offense, given the available targets, given the fact that he's just a consistent 100-plus target guy. So I have to rep up my former Cowboy. That being said, who's your 4th guy, Corey?
Yeah, he's literally just Cole Beasley in a different division, pretty much. Hunter Renfrow is currently going at pick 227, which is, again, like a 19th, 20th round pick. And again, much like Josh Reynolds, much like Cole Beasley, this isn't sexy at all. We know Renfro's ceiling is probably like wide receiver 21 in PPR. Like, he's not ever going to finish as a top 15 option. It would really be surprising if he did, but people discount assets like this all the time. Like we said, this is football. People get injured. You need depth on your dynasty team. And I mean real depth, not depth that is feasible depth like Cornell Powell and Anthony Schwartz. Well, I like some of the upside of those guys, but you can't ever put them in your lineup next year, at least. Like, if you go into the season with Cornell Powell and Anthony Schwartz as your wide receiver 5 and 6, and let's say your wide receiver 2 and your wide receiver 4 get injured, you can't put those guys in your flex spot. You cannot put those guys in your lineup at any point in the season. But if you're like, you have 2 guys on bye too, you can't use those guys. Renfrow, if nothing else, can be an absolutely desperation flex play at the bare minimum in a situation that should yield him more targets than he had last year. Because Nelson Agholor is gone, they really haven't added anybody of note. They brought in the aforementioned John Brown as the only real addition to this offense. And the guys ahead of him on the depth chart are Henry Ruggs, who is, as much as I love him, is unproven still, and Bryan Edwards. Like, those are the top 3 starting receivers for the Las Vegas Raiders, along with John Brown and Zay Jones. Like, there's plenty of targets up for grabs, and Darren Waller can't do everything in this offense. So Hunter Renfrow is a guy that I'm going to find myself grabbing in the 20th round as a guy that I can start as my wide receiver 7 or 8.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree. And
he's still young too.
People just hate drafting boring white slot receivers that are 5'8" and 170 pounds. But guess what? They're going to continue going criminally underrated because of that. And you can just keep scooping value specifically on win now type teams. With that being said, let's talk about a win now running back, which gasp is not a pure pass catcher falling in this range. No, it just so happens to be a guy who's seeing 80 vacated opportunities on the best rushing team in football and isn't going to be selected in the top 50 picks, 150 picks, sorry. Gus Edwards, what? This is a 26-year-old running. Okay, let me just break it down simply, right? This is a 26-year-old running back coming off a top 35 half PPR season at the most scarce position in fantasy football, who sees the departure of Mark Ingram, and he's not a top 150 pick. Like, look, I'm all for the J.K. Dobbins breakout. You guys know I love J.K. Dobbins. He's a fantastic talent. But Gus Edwards ain't going nowhere and showed last year that he's a good and efficient grinder that can really complement what the Ravens rush attack is trying to do with Lamar and J.K. If you don't believe me and you don't think he's a good running back, in terms of efficiency last year, get this. He was 7th in true yards per carry, 8th in yards per touch, 7th in breakaway run rate, and number 2 in expected points added amongst the running back position. And at a current RB5 level on your dynasty team, I expect Edwards to honestly return fringe top 25 type value. Honestly, at the running back position, top 25, I can absolutely see him smashing that this year. And the fact that he's going in the 13th round of startups right now, like if he was 33, 34, okay, I get it. He's 26 years old, for crying out loud. Like, I don't understand his ADP at all.
Right. And you also get the dual handcuff value with him, right? He's kind of like a Kareem Hunt in a sense, except he doesn't catch passes. He's going to be a guy that is involved on the goal line. He's going to be a guy that is efficient with his touches, because pretty much every Ravens running back is efficient with his touches. But Gus Edwards kind of started that trend by being efficient early in his career when he was a rookie undrafted free agent. So this is a dude that is, if anything happens to J.K. Dobbins, is a top 20 running back at minimum, probably top 15, top 12. But at the very least, you're getting a guy that, again, you can probably plug into your flex spots if the Ravens are playing the Jaguars or something like that, like a bad defense that they're going up against. You could play Gus Edwards last year, and people did. And while I think J.K. Dobbins is going to take a step forward, Gus Edwards is probably still going to get 10 to 15 touches a game.
Yep, I fully agree. And it still boggles me, the fact that he's going at 155 current in ADP. It just makes no sense. But that being said, hope you guys made it this far in the video. We ranked our top 10 best values in Dynasty in terms of veterans. And if you made it this far, Corey, you pick it. What are they commenting today?
Comment down below pork chops, because I'm about to go make some fire ones. I'm absolutely starving right now. So Zanny mentioned, if you guys did enjoy this video, comment any of your thoughts down below. Pork chops, a question that you have in Dynasty, just that you enjoy the content, whatever it is, it'll all help us out tremendously in the YouTube algorithm. Like the video SEO, also helps us out, and subscribe to the channel if you're new. Maybe you're on the fence. You've watched a couple videos of ours. You're like, these guys kind of know what they're talking about. It's totally free. Like, just do it if you haven't already done so. So appreciate that, guys. Join the Discord, check out the draft guide. All that being said, peace out and enjoy your Wednesday.
Peace out, yeah.
Wire me the money.